Hello, everyone. Welcome. As you hop in, please introduce yourself in the chat. And in fact, let me make sure our chat is fully turned on right now. Amazing it is. Go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat. Where are you coming from in the world? Maybe what institution are you at, your role? If you're a PACbacker, you can say hey in the chat as well. You know, I love that. So go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat. I'm going to make sure that our Q&A and our chat is fully turned on so everyone has full access, and let's get started. So thanks so much for joining us for our now sixth roundup that we've done with PACback and the League for Innovation in the Community College. Again, if you're just logging in, introduce yourself in the chat, name, role, institution, and then optional, share one way you've used Gen AI in your course this fall. Some housekeeping, if you've been to many of these, you know this. Webinar recording and attendee certificate will be shared within the next 2 days. And then you can access all the recordings as well as the deck that we use at pacback.co/webinars. Please, for all of your questions, ask them with the Q&A feature. That way we can actually queue them. And I have a colleague who's online who will answer some questions asynchronously through the chat function. And you can also answer each other's questions too. Q&A feature is fully on. And then any ideas you have, any notes, if you want to have a conversation, use the chat. I'll prompt you to use the chat for reflections. And we'll be eyeing that Q&A feature, and we'll try to fit in as many questions as we can as we go. So if you do not know, hello, my name is Kelsey Berenger. I'm the CEO of PACback. I started my career in the high school chemistry and physics classroom and joined PACback just over 6 years ago, where we've been using AI to deliver students feedback and help instructors scale their impact. Amanda, we're so excited to have Amanda today. Amanda, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm a former teacher. I am also a former adjunct and a PhD dropout. So I appreciate everyone in here that did not drop out of their PhD program. I did my teaching in New York City. And since then, since being in academia and deciding it wasn't quite for me, I've been building education technology companies. And my last job, I was over in Australia. So I was a CEO of an ed tech in Australia. And then came back and got into this world of generative AI. And the first time I ever used generative AI was when I was thinking about building my own generative AI tool to support student well-being. And as soon as I used it for the first time, ChatGPT, I realized that this would be the game changer we've been talking about in ed tech for a really long time. But also there was a really steep adoption curve ahead of us in the education ecosystem. So I started AI for Education back in April. And yeah, it's been wild. Literally, we've done work across 6 countries. We really are kind of the center of the ecosystem. I get to talk to, community colleges and colleges. I get to talk to K-12 institutions, and we do a lot of work at the policy level as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. And if you've come to these sessions before, I recommend constantly Amanda's materials to folks who are looking to learn more about generative AI or expand their expertise. So a little bit of a fangirl moment for myself. So it's exciting to have you. And then Rufus, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Rufus Glasper, President and CEO of the League for Innovation in the Community College and Chancellor Emeritus of the Maricopa Community Colleges. And looking forward to this conversation today.
Thank you. Well, it's great to have you back, Rufus, and do another one of these sessions. So on the agenda today, we're going to do a year in review, just kind of reflect on what the last year has been like for us. It's wild. It's felt like 10 years and 10 minutes at the same time. Talk about AI detection, because that's been a really popularly recommended topic of discussion in these sessions. We're going to talk about AI policies, and then lastly, engaging students in the AI conversation. So before we get started, I want to pass it to Rufus to do a little bit of an introduction and kind of set the tone for our session today.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. Again, I want to welcome you to this session. We are finding that there is continued interest and growing knowledge in the area of generative AI and ChatGPT. And as for the League is involved because we are involved in innovation. We are involved in thought leadership. And this particular focus is one that all of our colleges are looking at. I just completed 4 days of meeting with some individuals who said that their goal is to move from a dean's role from a vice president's role into possibly a president in our community college system. And I will tell you, over the last 4 days, more than half, I would say probably 3/4 of those who presented, and we had faculty. Our faculty is made up of current sitting presidents and those who are in the space around innovation. To a person, someone mentioned something about AI, something about Chat GPT, examples, how they use it in a daily engagement, and how they are engaging not only their faculty and staff, but how they're also engaging their governing boards as well. So I enjoy this conversation, and the league is working with PACBAC because we're looking at ways to provide some additional areas of professional development that will focus in terms of supporting faculty, supporting vice presidents and provosts, and trying to get some badging, recognizing that everything changes quickly, but trying to make sure that there are available opportunities so that we can continue our knowledge, continue our conversation, and get excited, as well as broadening our community of practice around this particular topic. So we ask you to get engaged today, to ask the questions, and to continue to follow us as we continue this conversation. Back to you, Kelsey.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And engaged is the key word here. I have high expectations that the chat is going to be lively and we're going to make some friends and connections. So we're going to get started with a poll as we think about the last year and how our, let's say, maybe sentiment towards generative AI has changed since we first saw ChatGPT to now. Let me see if I could find the polls over here. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead and launch. Take about 30 seconds. How has your opinion of AI changed over the last year? Are you feeling more optimistic? Are you feeling somewhat optimistic, but still curious? Are you feeling like you started skeptical and now you're just in a state of sheer existential panic? Maybe both. I personally find myself going yo-yoing back and forth between optimism and excitement to just a little bit of existential panic. I don't know about you, Amanda, if you feel the same.
Yeah, I think that it's quite funny. It depends on who I'm talking to, but sometimes people will say it's AI for education or anti-AI for education. Like I'll get called out on, we tend to have these like dichotomies that we talk about is either you're a doomer or you're an optimist. But I think that idea of balance, like I find that we really think about it in terms of there are really positive potential impacts, but there are also some really like critical use cases and issues that we can't ignore. So it is a back and forth for us here.
Yeah. It also doesn't help if like Ex Machina is one of my favorite films, right? So it's like in the back of my head is always AI might murder me. But we're going to talk about how AI is going to help the universe today. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. We'll get a good idea of the audience. A lot of us feeling much more optimistic, about 31%. Somewhat more optimistic, but still have some concerns, which I think, again, we love realism. We love logical, practical application of new technology. And some folks, I think, are still feeling concerned or still forming their opinion, which is absolutely fair. But looking back at the last year, it's been a lot. And in many ways, it's felt like 10 years. It's felt like 10 minutes. I think for me, the pivotal moment, kind of the core memory, is seeing that Atlantic article, The College Essay is Dead. That was, to me, when I really started to think about the implications of generative AI and this education space outside of, some professional creators, was really the first industry rocked by AI going mainstream, and specifically generative AI. And then we see things like, countrywide bans on generative AI just to be removed. We saw things like release of a lot of detectors and universal integration of AI detectors just to then start being turned off by institutions. So Amanda, you've shared a little bit about your story and how you have worked historically in education and education technology, and then at the new year kind of completely pivoted what you did. So yeah, when exactly did you start AI for education, and how has your journey progressed, and what drew you to generative AI?
Yeah, so I was a CEO in Australia, and had I was a first time CEO in a new country in a COVID and the most locked down place in the world. So if that is not a recipe for burnout, I don't know what is. And so I actually left Australia in July of 2022, and I was on my burnout journey pretty significantly. So I traveled. So this time last year, I was actually just coming back from Japan, and which loved Japan. Everyone should go. And so when I got back to the U.S., I think that we're all, Rufus talked about this. We're all kind of on our own journey, and I was navigating like what I wanted to do next. And like I said, I started with thinking, okay, I really care about student well-being. I'd already built a well-being tool. I'm a published author in the space. Like let's actually look at using a large language model to support this. And I was working to do this, and what I realized is that we were really early on this technology, and it wasn't clear like who would be the winner, or like what the technology would be. Would it be OpenAI, or would it be these smaller organizations? And then it also felt like the technology just wasn't quite ready for student facing. And like we're going to talk about ethics later today. So what ended up happening is I started using, I just started playing around with ChatGPT, and I realized that, like I said at the top, is that what it have, like, it is moving so quickly. It is not an intuitive technology in any way, shape, or form. It's not like the most technically advanced thing we do every day pretty much is search Google on the whole. And maybe we use Excel and some macros in Excel, but like realistically, we don't we're not really using like high level computer technology every day, especially not in a way that requires computational thinking. And so, but generative AI, even though it is conversational AI, meaning that we could talk to it, like the computer science language of right now in the future is actually English. We're moving away from binary code, and we're moving into, like, if you look at ChatGPT, the underlying technology, the system prompt that tells it what to do, like be polite and try not to be inappropriate, is not lines of code. It's literally saying be polite in English. And so that was something that was really interesting to me. And I started publishing, we started sharing on LinkedIn. And in fact, I'm actually going to share right now in the chat. We also did a timeline of the first year of generative AI as well. So I'll share that in the chat in a moment. And so we just started doing that. And through that, it became clear that there was a real kind of lack of practical advice for educators. And so we just wanted to be that space. And so, like, could we put out policy guidance? Could we put out, like, we don't do these huge toolkits. We'll do like, okay, what is a tactical 1-pager or 2-pager that can help guide what we're doing? And at the same time, it allowed us to also, like, I get to work with schools, students, teachers, professors every day pretty much. In fact, this week I did a introduction generative AI with a tribal college in Bismarck, which was amazing because we actually do work around like bias is a big part, and we actually saw bias in the model when like the model could respond in Lakota, but then it was using incredible stereotypes around like the Lakota nation's, like his cultural background. So I think that that's really exciting, because I think that so much of today is not only like finding some practical use cases, but just learning together. And we get to be a huge part of people's learning journey right now.
Yeah. And I think too, when I've had the opportunity to connect with educators, the one thing I hear is, I'm over sentiment. Now I'm just ready to do. Just give me practical applications and let me start doing based off of what I'm learning about AI. So I think that's right on the nose. So a really, I would say, widely requested topic that we've been asked to discuss in more depth and talk about practical application is generative AI detection. And this is a place in which you have, I would say, a ton of knowledge. You've done a lot of research. You've done a lot of your own research, right, using detectors. And you've also really started to poke holes in detector application. So I'm going to launch a quick poll here, just so that folks can share with us, are they using detectors? And let me make sure this is launching. There we go. Are you using detectors? What kind of detector are you using? What is your approach to detection? So we can get a baseline. And then also thinking about from a timeline perspective, I think most of us have either turned in our grades for this fall semester, we're about to, and we have probably maybe a month to, some of us 3 weeks, some of us maybe up to 6 weeks before our next semester begins. And it is an opportunity for us to pause, reflect, learn, do some research, learn from one another. Is our approach to AI detection sound? Could it use some feedback? Could it use some modification? So I'm going to go ahead and let some folks answer in the poll before I ask you a bunch of questions, Amanda. And just so I know too, any detectors, or what are detectors that you've done a lot of experimentation with, or you've been able to play around with directly?
GPT-0, copy leaks, and Turnitin. And I know the people from both copy leaks and GPT-0. And so there are more. There are more and more. Brisk has a AI detection tool, and so I know Armin, who runs Brisk pretty well. So like those, but the most common ones are the first three we talked about.
Okay, perfect. So you've been able to play around with them a little. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll in just a moment. So if you haven't yet answered the poll, go ahead and do so. Also, if my Wi-Fi goes in and out, I'm so sorry. I'm getting the 2 out of 3 bars right now on my computer, so I don't know what's going on.
We can still
all
hear
right, so
that's good.
Perfect. That's all we need. All right, so we're getting a pretty good mix. Some folks using it regularly, some folks using it occasionally, some folks not using it with no plans to use it. Majority is Turnitin, which makes sense. A lot of academic institutions already have Turnitin integrated. It's as simple as turning on a switch. What challenges? It seems like a lot of us dealing with high false positives, difficulty in distinguishing between student work and AI generated work, lack of awareness or training is a high one. And as far as the most common, I would say, recommended approach, it should be used as a tool for random checks or suspicion-based investigations. So let's talk a little bit about AI detection. I've discussed AI detection previously in that the way that generative AI detection works is not the way that traditional plagiarism detection works. Plagiarism detection works by looking at the submitted text and directly matching it to previously submitted work on the internet or in a database. If we're thinking about crime, it is forensic evidence, right? It is just a DNA test. Now, the issue with AI detection is that it is not plagiarism detection. It's not looking at a database and it's able to match. That's not what's happening here. What's happening with AI detection is it is a statistical model, just like large language models are statistical models. So in the way that a large language model is predicting the likelihood of the next word and then generating that word, not all heroes wear capes. An LLM is going to say capes in that word because that's a 99% likelihood that that word is going to follow that series of words. Detection works in reverse. And so this is an image that my CTO put together that I think is actually really, really helpful in saying this. So in text generated by GPT, you're going to see a lot of green words and yellow words. What it's doing is looking at, in the string of text, what's the most likely next word? And if that word, let's say, I've been involved in, let's focus on that in right there, the top 10 most likely words to follow, I've been involved. If it's in that top 10, it's going to be green. If it's in the top 100, it's going to be yellow. If it's in the top 1,000, it's going to be purple. If it's in the top 10,000, it's going to be, let's say, red. So it's statistical. So it is a statistical model, but the question is now, is it reliable? How do we rely on it? Should we rely on it? Just because we can see this nice dichotomy doesn't actually mean that's what student work versus non-student work looks like. The reality is that if I am learning how to write and I have the lexicon of a 6th grader, my human text might look like this, quite frankly. Or maybe it's not because I have the lexicon of a 6th grader. But let's talk a little bit about AI detection. And this is why are they problematic? But really, Amanda, what I want you to chat about is why can't we use nor can we trust AI detectors in a vacuum?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that what's really interesting about AI detectors are that number one, I'm sorry, everybody here. I wish I could tell you that there was the X-ray glasses that will allow you to see if something is AI written, or pixel like a image or a video are all code, like the ways in which generative AI work. And I can't. And people that tell you they can, including PackBack, are not. And because not only are these tools like really, first of all, you can get around these tools very easily. So for example, GPT-0 uses something called burstiness as an area. And if you ask, like ChatGPT-4 to rewrite something with burstiness, then what you're going to see is it's going to get around GPT-0 almost immediately. And the first full stop is that OpenAI, who runs ChatGPT, had an AI detector. And you know what they did is they shut it down. So if you want to take the company that is growing and is the best on the market is not able to do this accurately, even from their own tool, then you know that this is something that's going to be essentially a struggle for any tool that's being built alongside of it. Turnitin created this space in colleges and community colleges that said that you could have an easy way to see if students were plagiarizing. And it was something that we accepted wholesale and what we used and we incorporated. And so when we look at this new technology, I think what we're trying to do is use that schema and then saying, here, we'll just plug and play, but they're not the same thing at all. And in fact, like right now, even the idea of watermarking images, it's so easy to get around. And so what I have to say is that while it sounds like this nice thing and it would make things so much easier, we're not in an easy place. There's no easy win right now on this work. So I wish I could tell you there was. You know how much easier my job would be if the technology was more responsibly made, if they're like, meaning the large language models themselves, if there was like 1 or 2 tips, if we can detect AI generated content, my life would be much easier. It'd probably be a lot more boring and you might not even need me. But unfortunately, we're at this infancy state. This technology essentially is at this rate of acceleration is about a year old. So the second thing is that we see here they're false positives, but also false negatives. So someone in the chat actually identified that this is not only is it missing, identifying at least like, so Turnitin is 0.7% is what they say is their false positive rate. And it's about 1% for GPT-0 and 1% for copy leaks. And so that means that 1 out of 100 papers will be falsely accused of using AI detection. And guess what? Grammarly now uses generative AI. And most students do not actually know that they are using generative AI because Grammarly, up until like 6 months ago, was not an AI tool in the traditional sense that we're talking about now. So that's number one. Number two is that these tools have between a 15 and 20% false negative rate, which means that a large percentage of students that are using AI are being undetected. So what we're really doing is we're picking up bad cheating. We're not picking up like good cheating. And we also know that cheating has been a part of the way like academic life forever. I joke that, Socrates, someone probably brought like a tablet with like a stylus and, have their crib sheet that they worked on beforehand. But what's happening is I think we're trying to use old schema and old models to think about new technology. And so the last thing I'll say is that it has been shown to also discriminate against non-native English speakers and students that also are going to have that like purple prose, so to speak, like people that are really like, like to use the word delve. Everyone says, oh, if someone says delve, hate to break it to you, but I use delve all the time. And I hopefully am not AI generated. But I think that this is where we have this really unique moment in time where we suggest very highly that it's more about AI literacy and reframing how we think about technology and how we think about student assessment in a stage in which we have this technology that now can approximate and do better in terms of written assessments than not only our students, but sometimes our professors.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And also hearing you say that, I'm realizing the hardest exam I ever took in college was open book, open internet, open phone, because it was such a challenging question that he basically took this concept in analytical chemistry and extrapolated it, and we needed us to be creative and apply our baseline knowledge. But there was no generative AI that could have gotten me in that mindset of trying to figure that out. There was no internet. And I think in many of the ways that we used to ban the internet in assignments, and now we're incorporating the internet in assignments and online activities. We're probably going to be in a scenario in which we're incorporating generative AI in activities. So, you know, I want to hear your advice for educators how they can approach, let's say they do need to have a writing assignment. Maybe they're a writing educator, or maybe they're an English educator or something. They need to have writing, and they ultimately do not want students copying and pasting from generative AI. What recommendation would you give educators who need to assign writing and are really looking for students to use their own brain cells and not go to a generative AI model?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that, we're most likely moving from a product to process mindset when it comes to pedagogy and andragogy. And so, this idea of like what we used to do is like come in and then you have a term paper and it's due. And like maybe you saw the student once or twice for office hours and maybe you did some drafting, but really what you're doing is putting it all on their shoulders. And we actually know that is actually really, really hard for students, especially from diverse backgrounds that maybe don't have some of the foundational skills or those self-regulation skills that are necessary to do that work. And so we've always been those types of products have always actually been really difficult for some students to complete. And I think that's something that we want to think about. But what I would say is that like, instead of saying like at the end, like we're going to have this paper you're going to submit, like what are the process steps that are really important? And how can you have that be something that instead of a final exam, there are actually core components that students do. And some of it might be in classroom, some of it might be, hey, you can use AI to support your brainstorming and everything. But what we're going to do is that you're going to have it's going to be a blue book. You're going to come in like we do a lot of times. And you're going to do a final writing process, but you're going to be able to bring in all those pieces that helped you get there. And that is an example of how you can, instead of moving fully to like no internet, no AI, et cetera, but what you're saying is like the process of it, we still want you to do that together. I think there are also these opportunities to start thinking about more authentic assessments. I think that, and I'm a former educator and I'm an adjunct, and I just asked this to some of the teachers and professors I've worked with is like, how many of us have that file or that binder of assessments that we have had forever, literally forever? And like, is it time? I think it is, to go back and start looking at those assignments and assessments and start rethinking them. Like a hot take for today is that I think we will have AI bots that are part of like standardized assessments in high schools pretty like in the next 5 years, like the same way that a calculator would be used, but much differently. There'll be specific bots that have specific abilities, right? They won't just be these open models. But I think that this is where we are in a place in which the world is changing around us, and we need to change our pedagogical and andragogical approaches to take into account that like a lot of people going forward, like our work will focus on if you talk about 10,000 reps, we'll focus on the last 1,000. Like we will be focused so much more on the refining, the choosing, the synthesis, the creativity components. And maybe maybe it's like the first 1,000 and the last 1,000 what we're really working on, depending on what the tool is. But it doesn't mean we don't need the middle 9,000, right? But it does change the way we need to think about technology, and the way we think about our assessment, our instruction, and the way we think about students actually getting to partner with these technologies, because they're going to be required, most likely, to augment their practice when they get to career.
Yeah, and I'm going to use this as a plug for one of my favorite frameworks. And I think when we're thinking about rethinking our assessment at the beginning of the term, it's like rethinking our approach to assessment and our approach to educating our students are you familiar with self-determination theory?
Yes, a little bit.
Yeah, I love it because it's basically what are the conditions I can create to instill intrinsic motivation in my students? And it's, do they feel purpose? Do they have autonomy? And mastery learning is part of it, right? You can only fail so many times until you just give up on something. So can I experience those wins and keep wanting to experience wins? So I think for me, when I go back to in the way that I'm assessing my students or teaching my students or facilitating instruction, am I perpetuating the conditions of self-determination theory? Because if so, they're going to want to learn. They're not going to want to use a chat bot. And then you're also able to start pulling in things like generative AI into the learning experience if you're also then forcing them into mastery of a new skill and then giving them autonomy. So I think there's a lot to be said there of, are we asking ourselves about the learning environment we've created. And then I just saw a question come in the chat from Anna. Hi, Anna. Which is, how do faculty create the time and space to do this? How do we create the time and space for faculties? Yeah. Amanda, what are your thoughts?
The thing I say to people making decisions all the time is that this is not another thing. This is not another thing, guys. This is not a close our door and it will go away and the world will change very slowly. And this is a change management process, and we have got to carve out time. And if that means that other things have to be reprioritized, that's what it has to do. And I think that we move at a speed could be quite slow at times, and sometimes well earned, that slow kind of approach, that risk averse, that slow changing, slow moving. But this is really an existential question for us all. Like, this isn't something that is going to go away, and if anything, it's only going to come more ever present. And so I think that what we suggest is that, like, this becomes a priority. We say build AI literacy first. So like, if you are not sure what like generative AI means, like if you think like AI and generative AI as a subset are quite different, 84% of us interact with AI every day. If you have one of these, you interact with AI literally every day without realizing it. It is ever present in our lives in about the last 10 years. And it means things like predictive text. It means things like facial recognition. Generative AI is a different type of AI that's quite different and quite demonstrably more impactful to education and work as well. And I think that this is where it gets really, really interesting, that we need to build AI literacy, and then there needs to be time. So our theory of change is learn, experiment, innovate. And so the innovate piece is where we get to after we've had that time to actually learn and to start trying and seeing how we can change and experiment and expand, right? And then that last piece is like, what does that actually mean for reframing assessments, pedagogy and andragogy, syllabi, graduation requirements? Guys, what's going to happen with college essays? Like, what is the college essay going to be? Because right now, I promise you, a very strong use case of generative AI is the college essay. And is that going to be able for us to give the same level of weight to that as it has been in the past?
Yeah, you hit that right on the head. Rufus, what are your thoughts?
Hey, Kelsey, I have a question, and the question is for you, Amanda. And you talked about your work with tribal colleges and others, and so I'm going to try to make this as broad as possible. What ethical issues? We're talking about ethical issues. I meant to say, what equity issues have you encountered relative to generative AI and chat and so forth?
So
what should we be concerned about?
So, I mean, number one, I think that like someone actually identified in the chat, GPT-4 by far is the best on the market right now, especially for complex methods, data analysis, image creation, brainstorming, etc. And that is a $20 a month fee. And that is a lot of money for people, especially with something that doesn't work all the time and requires a pretty high level of understanding and critical use, because these technologies are still very new. So that's just a very easy one. It's also not available to everybody. Like literally GPT-4 was closed up until yesterday. But it's also like, you look at Claude, for example, it's not available in Canada. And that's the second best on the market, and actually does have some great capabilities that would be great for students, especially it's a very good writing tool, does a great job of uploading and analyzing large amounts of text. So we have some just basic like access issues. The second piece is like students, like all cultural capital, right, Rufus, is that like if parents are using it and like aware of it, then students also tend to be. So there's a natural component of that too, of like who knows about this, who has access, and who's building those capacities and capabilities. That's absolutely a part of this. And the third thing is, like I talked about, the Lakota one was so fascinating because it was actually like such a good group. And they have both Lakota Nation professors and non-Lakota Nation professors. And so the non-Lakota Nation professors are like, oh my gosh, for the first time, I can actually build some culturally responsive work. And so there was a computer science educator who wanted to build a Python activity that connected to his student's life. He was not Lakota. And what he did is he essentially got back, first, it was something that was like deeply stereotypical and not actually applicable. So it was a totem exercise. And then one of the wonderful professors were like, that's not a Lakota. Not only is that not Lakota, but that's actually probably like just really, really ridiculous and stereotyped across many nations. And they did it again. And the second one was we gave it feedback, and then they said like sacred rights. And she's like, we definitely don't want to do a Python activity on sacred rights. It's just not appropriate. And the thing is, because these tools are not thinking, they have no conception of the world really at all, right? That they don't like it, it's approximating, it is probabilistic, it is connecting words together, and it's seeing totems are part of like, of Native American experience. It's got to be right, because that's what we see in the training data. So I think that this is where we get down to like bias is a big part of this as well. And we see that there's plenty of research that shows things like if you ask ChatGPT to talk about and explain algorithms to a women's group and a men's group, can you imagine the difference? The men's group is very technical. It is very like, high level. It's really about the computer science and computational thinking. To the women's group, starts talking about like washing machines. And so there are some deep biases that are part of this. Like, I'm not joking, this is real. And so I think that this is where it gets really, really interesting, is that when we do think about equity, when we do think about this, is that I think that teaching people about AI literacy is more than just saying, hey, this is a great new tool, but like, how do I become a critical user of this technology and see where maybe I can go build now, and I can build a better system that isn't as biased or can help me more directly. And I think the power of today is that we can now build with technology with English. And that is an opportunity for us all to start building and be creators, but not without this really big push towards AI literacy and access that needs to start very early, but should be, I think, a part of every part of our society, especially in the education system.
Thank you.
I am pretty boring, guys. This is all I think about. So if you ever want to talk about AI, everybody come to Amanda's show.
As you were chatting about trying to create this Python model, and what was the tribe again? Lakota, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, Lakota. And the Lakota faculty being like, no, this isn't right. It almost had me thinking through like, is the future of generative AI that subject matter experts, instead of writing textbooks, now they create fine-tuned models? Like, is that the future of knowledge share and providing quality knowledge share?
I think that's a huge part of that. Like, I think that this is a democratizing action if we take it as a democratizing action. And so I think that we're going to see more small language models. So when we talk about ChatGPT, Claude, Bard, which is now powered by Gemini, and another, we're talking about these large language models. And when we think about those, is that they're designed to be like a sledgehammer. This sledgehammer can do like everything, right? But usually what we need the sledgehammer to do is like a needle. We need the smallest, tiniest thing that we're asking it to do. And so you take a sledgehammer to that. That's not a very efficient process and actually could damage the needle. And so like small language models, and it's also why we prompt differently, as we try to give context to make that a smaller kind of like approach, is I think the small language models are becoming more and more available, which are saying like, here, we don't need billions and trillions of parameters and training and all of this, but can we do this better and have more specific point solutions or more fine-tuned models that do something really, really well? And those also tend to be open source as well. So Mistral is a French company that is coming out with they've come out with a smaller model that is like less expensive to run. It's open source, which comes with its own ethical things, but like it's something that where if you wanted to right now, you could run an instance of Mistral on your computer and you could start fine tuning it. So it just helps. So Rufus, if you just want to help with your, your community colleges and you want to have all your database of all your information, it could just be for that. And that's going to become more and more present in our lives, I think, over the next like 36 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we were going to talk a little bit about policy, but I'm actually going to skip it. Like I said, I like to be agile and on the fly, but what I will say is that we're going to follow up with some resources on policy creation, because Amanda has shared some really great resources through her network, and then also has created amazing resources herself. So this will be shared, and maybe Peter, who is on my team, can put some of these links in the chat as well, just in case you don't want to wait for the deck to come out. But I think that a lot of the conversation that we had about AI detection is assuming that students are using AI for nefarious purposes on purpose. And I kind of want to take a moment to pause and actually just talk about our students for a moment, because a lot of us here interact with students regularly. We've had aha moments with students, and some of us, like Amanda, have been doing a lot of research in this space, specifically how are students engaging with generative AI and how do they feel about generative AI. So let's start with a little thought exercise. I'm going to have everyone in the chat share the answer to 2 questions. One, regarding your students, what aspect of generative AI do you think causes them to lose sleep when you think about your students? And I want to also acknowledge that student populations across institutions, across departments, across countries, states, they're going to differ. So students aren't a monolith. Let's just think about the students we serve in our capacity. And then second is, what do you think your students' number 1 hope regarding generative AI is? So I think this is probably a really great question to ponder before we start talking about the intersection between students and generative AI. Amanda, thinking back to your time in the high school classroom, were you high school or were you?
School, yeah, I taught high school biology.
Okay, when you think about the students you taught, what do you think their biggest fear would be around generative AI? When you think back to your classroom of students?
Well, I actually get to work with students right now, so I'll use the students from today. So we do two place-based learning. So I get to hang out with 25 11th and 12th graders from South Brooklyn twice a month, one on AI policy development and one on AI safety. And so I think that this is where it gets really interesting, is that students are really, really like interested in knowing what these tools are and have such a capacity for cognitive dissonance that I think is something we really miss and we see less and less of as we are seeing this very kind of bifurcated world, that we are having black or white kind of conversations. And I think that, you know, when students start to learn about these technologies, they're really curious about not just how it can support their work, but also what it means for their lives. What does it mean to have it be ethical? I think they recognize and understand that these tools are unethical when they're used to plagiarize or to cheat. I think that that is something that there's a lot of curiosity, and they really want to understand that what these tools can mean for them. Another thing I say is that you think about your students, like we all have jobs here, like our jobs might be augmented, but what about a job what's going to be available in 4 years if you have a freshman, or in the case of these students in 5 to 6 years? Like there's real uncertainty about the future. And so I think that that's on one side, but what we hear as well is a lot of mixed messages. The first message being AI is for cheating, and if you use it, you're doing something wrong. And that rhetoric is legitimately everywhere. Everywhere. And it is something that is absolutely causing either hidden use that could be unethical or harmful. It's causing kids that are afraid of being told that they're cheating to avoid it completely, which is a major fairness and equity question of like saying like, we're just going to stop those. And then others that are kind of like getting up and saying, hey, listen, we cannot wait. And so I think that this is where it gets really, really tricky, because we have so much rhetoric and misconceptions and uncertainty that's happening with a lack of guidance from, let's say, your provost. So they're kind of waiting. They don't know what's best. It's moving so quickly. That is, then your professors are having that same experience, and there's uneven adoption and understanding. And so maybe one professor is saying it's okay, one professor is saying it's not. One professor says, you know, like it is cheating only, and then that goes down, right? And that filters down. And so we really suggest very strongly that this is an opportunity to actually talk to students. Like I promise you right now, and can I ask a question?
Yeah.
If you have talked to a student about their AI use and actually talked to students, please put it in the chat. And like I did, like, because that is the thing, like if you have not, this is the best opportunity, the best conversations I have about AI ethics and the future of AI are with students. And if you have not had that conversation directly, please do. Please do. And so Anna, they were amazing. Like I did a keynote on Monday and I said, I'll do half an hour, but students have to be part of the second half hour. I'm not willing to do an hour keynote like without kids being represented. And I think that this is where like we cannot underestimate the impact of these technologies on kids, because it will impact them the most. Sorry, I feel very strongly about that.
No, it's true. And Anna has been in your seat before, and I know has had open forums, and also Heather Olson, our colleague, has also been in the panelist seat before, and actually pretty early on, post ChatGPT boom, had a conversation with a student who clearly had used generative AI for a paper. And it was just a learning moment. Like the student just didn't know, especially when we think about all the way back to kind of the first quarter of the year. Hey, Heather. Our students just didn't know. They didn't really understand what was cheating and what wasn't cheating. So I'm actually going to backtrack a little, which is this resource that you've created, which will be shared. Kind of, why do you want to use an AI chatbot? What do they want to use it for? How shouldn't they be using it? I think when we're talking about how can we be more explicit with our students, letting them understand, helping them understand how they should be using it, how they shouldn't be using it. We have to teach them. And I think too, we also have to model it. That might also be a much easier behavior. It's just a model to just start using AI to modify your assignments, and then telling students that you're using AI to modify your assignments, and then helping them understand how you edited the assignment after generative AI created it. So maybe there's a little bit of some secret sauce in modeling for our students if we don't have time for direct instruction. Amanda, I think back to the question we got earlier about like how do we create the space and time for it? If I was a chemistry teacher. I'm a chemistry professor. I already have to teach students chemistry. They already came into my class deciding they didn't like my classroom. So I've already got to like convince them they need to like chemistry. I've got to teach them chemistry. It's a really difficult concept. We're integrating math. We're integrating, critical thinking. Now, on top of that, I also need to teach them how to start interacting with generative AI and what good generative AI looks like and what inappropriate use of generative AI looks like. How do I do that? As someone who already has so much responsibility on my plate?
So I think, first of all, I think that there's a system approach that needs to happen. So I think that if you're a stakeholder in this room that has decision-making power, I think there's a level set moment that needs to happen. And that's what we do a lot. It's just like, we have this 90-minute introductory to generative AI where we talk about where it's been. We do myths and facts directly. We don't even get through the first half an hour without identifying things like AI bias, thinking versus computing, things we've talked about today, AI detection being unreliable. And then we go into hands-on prompt engineering, and we teach teachers and professors the capabilities and limitations the same way you do with students. So I think that's number one. There is a support that needs to happen, and it needs to be prioritized, and you need the right people coming in and doing it. And please do not just tap your one overworked professor that does a good handle. They might be ready for it, but also like they need some support too. This is moving very quickly. So I think the second thing is like, again, not another thing. So like, how do you build this in? A great opportunity is something like bringing in discussion guides and actually bringing this in and making it part of your assessments, right? So for example, a really great assignment you can give, we have a couple, but we have a climate guide that you could use that talks about the climate impact, where kids can read, students can read about the impact of generative AI on the environment. But something like there's a BCG, there's a really good research study on the impact of generative AI on consultants that was done by Ethan Mollick's team. And this could be such a beautiful case study to do with your students across pretty much, I would say, almost every classroom, every faculty, is that what they did is they had 7% of all BCG consultants that were essentially given a task, 2 tasks. They had 5 hours to complete it, and there was one task that was very AI capable, meaning like an AI was going to get that totally right. And they had another task that was actually quite tricky for an AI to be able to do because it would give a conflicting answer. And so what they did is they had 3 groups. They had a control group, no AI use. They had a GPT-4 group, and then a GPT-4 group with training. And I'll put this into the chat, Don, as soon as I stop talking. And so what they did is they said, okay, go and do. And so they did a lot of prep work, psychometrics. They identified the types of skill levels associated with these consultants. And what they found is that this use of GPT-4 with or without training collapsed the skill gap. So people that were on the lower skill level increased 43% in their quality of answer, 43%, whereas high skill or medium skill about 17 to 20%. So everyone improved, but like the skill gap collapsed. That was number one. Every single person was faster as well to do the tasks. And so that was pretty great. And like for the AI capable one, it was, okay, amazing. But the best part of this, and the thing that makes it so important for us to have these conversations about capabilities and limitations, is that those that use GPT-4 for the AI task, the task that the AI wasn't very good at, had higher quality, faster, wrong answers. And I'll say this again, higher quality, faster, wrong answers at 20% higher than the control group. So they gave more convincing answers that were wrong. And so they trusted BCG consultants that have gone through a lot of schooling that are supposed to be critical thinkers. In 5 hours, were convinced to take 95% of AI's outputs, ChatGPT-4's outputs, and put it into their work, okay? And so this is where I think that we have to have like something like that. How rich of a discussion would that be with your students? It is easy to understand. It's kind of funny a little bit too, like, oh my gosh, could you imagine? But it also is something that can really, really, really support this idea of critical use. And you can use it as a pedagogical, andragogical frame, that it's not just you getting up in front of a classroom and talking about why AI, you should be careful, or you should, like, it helps you. But those are the things I'd love to see more of, because it doesn't have to be separate. And we know that if we can incorporate this and authentically incorporate real world examples and opportunities to think and critically think and build, students not only are more engaged, but they do better. And also it's something that we don't have to do extra. It just becomes part of our pedagogical approach.
Amanda,
yeah.
let me ask a question. What is your experience or thoughts in regard to the three institutional sectors, and I'll use K-12, community colleges, and universities, appear to be addressing this issue independently? And we're talking about students that are on this continuum of moving from the K-12 system to our community colleges to the universities.
Yes.
Should we be forming a community of practice across the continuum so that students are not being impacted by multiple policy changes or different approaches in each of these areas? What are your thoughts or experience on that?
I think that communities of practice, I think that collecting and collating best practices, like Lance Eaton is a buddy. He's a person that has the AI policy compendium document. I think there is opportunities, Rufus, for convenings. I think there are opportunities to create spaces. I mean, I would love to see community colleges actually talk about that transitional space, right? And how you're going to build AI literacy potentially for students that have, like, there was someone actually identified this in the chat, that their students were banned from using it before they came into the classroom. And so I think that this is where it gets really, really interesting, that this is an opportunity to lead from the front and lead from the grassroots. And so we see that there's a place for both. And so a lot of what we do, like our website, like 95% of what we do is completely free, because we want it to be grassroots. So we have a prompt library. If you want to use prompts, we've got 100 prompts you can use on any chatbot, specifically free. They can help your practice as a professor, and some student-facing prompts. We've got the resources we've shared. We do a webinar every week. This week we did on differentiation. Next week we're doing it on durable skills with Tom Vander Ark. But then we do at the other end, right? We do on the other end, which is like policy, convenings, thought leadership, and hoping to start putting some shape where there has been none. And so I think a lot of this moment in time is that we don't need to create the best in class thing, but what we do need to do is take that blank page, and we need to put some shape to it so that people can react, respond, create, experiment, innovate. And so if we can do that, and organizations like your own, the League, PackBack, others, like everyone in this room, you have power in this moment, as that like we can come together and actually say, okay, there is a best practice. And so, for example, it'll be focused on K-12, but it'll be for everyone. We are spearheading an AI Literacy Day on April 19th. So put it on your calendar. April 19th, we'll have AI literacy bots that'll be safe to use for any grade level, including for teachers and parents, and a whole bunch of resources. And the reason why we're doing that is because we do believe that there needs to be this crystallizing moment that says that this is the most important thing we could do. And I think that if that's reflected in other decision-making bodies from other parts of the education ecosystem, it's only going to help.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you for sharing the perspective from our students. And, for the dawn of time, there are going to be students who try to be, again, nefarious, and on purpose. And, for whatever reason they have, they're the ones who test our patience. I always used to say they're the ones who need the most love. But I think it's so great to keep in mind that a lot of students right now fear. They feel fear that they are going to be cheating if they use generative AI at all. And so they're just not using it. So they're not growing. They're not learning new skills that we know are going to be required for them to persevere in their careers, because they're feeling fear right now. And I think for any educator feeling fear, maybe that's a connection point between our students and maybe a bridge for that conversation. So thank you again for sharing the perspective of the students so we can remind ourselves we're not alone in this journey. Let's go ahead and do some maybe final thoughts from the panelists. I'll do Amanda, Rufus, some final thoughts before we sign off. And if you are curious to learn more about PackBack, curious@packback.co is who you email. But yeah, I'll start with you, Rufus. Any final thoughts as we wrap up the discussion around AI, generative AI policies and detection and the student experience?
My summative comments are around just education and discussion. Community colleges are in a good position to kind of reach down and reach up. And that's why I asked the question about the conversation that's occurring right now, because and that's with the students in mind. As we're beginning to think about workforce programs and other kinds of initiatives where we're reaching down to the junior high level and reaching down earlier, I think it's important for us that we at least make the attempt to have a broader discussion around this continuum and how it's approached, because I think it'll be unfair for our students to have just different practices and policies, especially within the same community, within the same state. And so I think it should be more localized a little bit, but the conversation needs to happen, because if we continue to move out and just do our own thing, it'll be disruptive, not only with the faculty, but then also with the students as well. So those are my thoughts, but great conversation. Thank you.
Amanda, any final thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, no, I think that this is an opportunity. First of all, thank you all for your engagement and your willingness to share. My challenge, I'll give you challenges. I like to be active. So, if you haven't talked to your students about this, please do. If you have talked to your students about this, but your colleagues have not, share what you have learned. If you haven't experimented, if you haven't used generative AI for your own practice, the best way in is to experiment and find value for yourself, because it'll become so clear of how you can do that for your students. And then the last thing is that this is something that is a powerful moment. This is a moment in which, if you are thinking through how to help your students responsibly adopt these tools, they will be in a better position. And that's real. Very rarely can we say something that actually means that it will have a demonstrable impact on their lives. But as we talked about, collapsing the skill gap being something that's important for hiring, having students be critical users of technology in ways that they've never been. Because I think this is a thing, our students, we talk about digital literacy, media literacy. I don't think we really have that. And so this could be your Trojan horse to help that. So I think that this is an opportunity, and I have seen it, and I have seen the ways in which we can create AI literacy in ourselves, and how it immediately, as educators, we see that spark for ourselves, and we then think past AI is for cheating into AI could be for 100 things, and a lot of them amazing. So I just appreciate the time, Kelsey, and it was very nice to be with you, Rufus, as well. And thank you to everybody in the audience for joining.
Yeah. Thank you again for joining, especially because I know for many of us, it's finals week, grades are due. And in general, it's just a very chaotic time of the semester, if not year, with the holidays approaching. And Amanda, thanks so much for joining. Rufus, it's always lovely to chat. Have a wonderful remainder of the year, and I'll see everyone in the new year. Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.